I'd like to call together this meeting of the Carson City Airport Authority. It is Wednesday, September 26th. The hour is noon. We are at the Carson City Community Center Sierra Room. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Chairperson Law.
Here.
Vice Chair Val. Treasurer Harvey. Member Barrett.
Here.
Member Golden. Member Harris.
Here.
Member Rogers.
Here.
A quorum's present.
Would you rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the past meetings of the Airport Authority. Does anyone have any corrections or changes to the draft minutes as provided to us? Do I have a motion to accept those minutes?
I move.
Mr. Harris has moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Rogers has second. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. None heard. Motion passes. Item D, modification of the agenda. The chairman reserves the right to modify the agenda in order to most effectively process the agenda items. Items may be taken out of order. Items may be combined for consideration by the authority. Items may be pulled or removed from the agenda at any time. Does any member or staff have any proposed changes to the agenda? None seen. Any public comment on that item? None seen. We will move forward to item D. Item E, public comment. Members of the public who wish to address the Airport Authority may speak on agendized and non-agendized matters related to the airport. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person per topic. If your item requires extended discussion, please request the chairman to calendar the matter for a future Airport Authority meeting. Do I have any public comment at this time? None seen. We will move on. Item F has nothing under that item, so we will move to item G1. Public hearing for possible action, Carson City Airport Authority to consider approval of airport architectural engineering and planning services contracts. Mr. Mon.
Thank you, Chair Law. Just want to say that I received a draft contract from Armstrong just yesterday, so I haven't had a chance to review that, and I don't have anything in my hands yet from Kaufman. And due to my absence earlier this month, I'll have not begun the fee, independent fee analysis, but we'll get on that here shortly. So I propose that we move this till the next month, the next meeting.
Without objection, I'll table this item until next month. Any public comment on this item? Item is tabled. Item number G2 for possible action, Great Basin Aviation to present business application and supporting documents in order to be approved as a Class 2 fixed base operator, which will be a flight school. Mr. Moen.
Yes, I'd like to take the moment to introduce Jen Prinz in our audience. I think she is known to you, Chair Law, as a member of the 99s, and Jen and her husband, Danny, operate Great Basin Aviation at the Reno Tahoe International Airport. It was previously known as Flying Start Aero, and they purchased that from Janet Brown earlier this year. They have been operating at Reno Tahoe, I believe, since February. And so they have a short window of operation to look at. However, they have been very active, and I am familiar with not only them personally, I was the specialist for the Reno Tahoe Airport Authority when I shepherded their concession agreement through the airport and had them accepted as a operator at the Reno Tahoe Airport Authority. And then they also participated in our open house here earlier this year. And we, at that time, had initial discussions about the potential of them looking at Carson City as a viable satellite operation. They came down again earlier in the month of August, and we did a tour of the airport, and they also met with Representatives El Arrow and looked at office space on the north ramp, and has submitted an application to the Airport Authority for review. I have reviewed this application in detail and compared it to the requirements of Title 19. I believe that they meet those requirements, and I would like to put forth their application for the board's consideration as a Class 2 fixed base operator.
Any questions of Mr. Moen? Ms. Prenz, would you like to address us?
Yes, I would.
Thank you. Would you spell your name? I don't know that we have a sign-in sheet out.
No, we don't.
Okay, just spell your name for the record.
Thank you. My name is Jennifer Prinz, Jennifer, Jennnifer, Prinz, Prins. And Chair Law and board members, thank you for letting me speak on behalf of our company, Great Basin Aviation. We have put in the application, as Ken just referred to. Again, we are new in the aviation business industry, but we have owned a successful farming business for 22 years, sold that when we got into aviation. I got my license just a couple years ago, and immediately we just knew this is where we wanted to be, somewhere in aviation. Didn't know it was going to be a flight school. When we first purchased the school, we had one 172 trainer aircraft and a little Skycatcher, a 162. Since then, we've grown it to a fleet of 5 172s, the Skycatcher, and a 182. We've done it very strategically. We don't want to carry a lot of business debt, so we've made sure that we're being smart about this. We've also looked at other options as we continue to expand. Right now, I'm teaching ground school over at TMCC, Truckee Meadows Community College, but we are looking at bringing some of that in-house as well as other programs, mountain flying, some companion classes, really just anything to promote advocacy for the aviation industry and bring on new pilots. We have grown like we never thought we would. I mean, this is past like our 5-year plan. Right now, we've got the aircraft, we've got the students, we need more instructors, but we have been reaching out to several, and we have 3 that have committed if we do get approved to be at the Carson City Airport, that are familiar with the area, fly in and out of there, have planes there as well, so we'd be able to get started right away, because I do know there is a big aviation community in this area, and we'd really like to get more of these students up in the air. Thank you.
Thank you. Any question of Mrs. Prinz? Mr. Rogers.
Thank you for the application. It's complete, and it's clear that you meet all the requirements. Just curious, why Carson City? Why is that the correct place for your business to expand out of Reno?
Well, we have the fleet up in Reno, but we also have students that their path isn't towards the airlines. They want to stay more recreational. And one of the objections that we do get is having to deal with the towered airport. So a lot of them, I think comfort level, we'd have them flying more if we get them into like Carson Airport. Also, we have students that are driving up right now from Carson City to fly with us since the closure of Carson Aviation. So for ease on them, a little save them some gas money, we can get them flying down here in Carson. We used to have a hangar here at Carson Airport, so we are, or not here, the airport over there. So we are familiar with Carson. Carson Airport's near and dear to me. It's where I soloed, so it's something that I'd like to continue our business at, or move a part of our business to, expand our business to the Carson Airport, just on a personal side. But again, probably the biggest thing why we want to get down into Carson is just to be able to offer those students that are driving into Reno the school in Carson, and again, just continue to build the aviation community, because there is a need here. And I feel that, I didn't mention, but I think what sets us apart from some of the other schools is just the quality of our instructors and our aircraft. We do keep a more modern fleet. Everything is 97 or newer, except for one of our aircraft. It's a 74, but it's been converted to 180 horsepower and brand new glass panel. So we try to maintain a certain quality in our aircraft, and then again with our instruction. So just a little side note, forgot to add.
Any further questions of Ms. Prinz? Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Do we have any public comment on this issue? Seeing none, any further discussion or questions of our members? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion that we approve the FBO application of Flying Start Aero Services, LLC, doing business as Great Basin Aviation.
So moved.
Second?
I have a motion from Mr. Rogers, a second from Supervisor Barrett. Excuse me. That was a Freudian slip. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None heard. Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Prenz, and welcome. Moving on to item number G3, for discussion and possible action to approve Lean Engineering Nighttime Operation Feasibility Study. Mr. Moen.
Thank you, Chair Law. You may recall that a couple of meetings ago, it was tasked to me to investigate the issue of a nighttime instrument approach in Carson City. And so I did extensive research, one going over the materials that are in our files regarding the instrument approach for both runway 27 and runway 9, and as to why the FAA had put the restriction on there for nighttime visibility or nighttime operations. There was some data that in our files that indicated that there were two mountain peaks that were penetrating the 20-to-1 approach surface out to the east of the airport. There's no likelihood of a runway 9 nighttime approach due to the high terrain to the west of the airport. So our best opportunity is to runway 27, whether that approach originates from the north, the east, or the south. That is our preferred arrival route. However, there was some data that indicated that if they lit those peaks, that would eliminate the nighttime restriction. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out why obstruction lights on two peaks, if you're in the soup, would be of any value to a pilot at that point in time. So I was really having a hard time reconciling that. And further discussions with our engineering firm, Atkins, as well as with the ADO, when I was at the SWAE conference in Sacramento in July, I was chatting with Kaufman Associates, our planning consultant, and they recommended that I go out into the foyer and meet with Lean Engineering, who had a booth set up at the event. So I met with Paul Hanna and did an initial introduction and discussion. We followed up that call and that contact when I returned to Carson City, and we had a conference call earlier in the month, and then we followed up with a proposal that you have in your packet. And we had a lengthy discussion on August 20th concerning that proposal. One of the big questions I asked him, Paul Hanna with Lean Engineering, is what makes you think that you can get this nighttime restriction removed? And they said, probably not on the existing approaches. What we're going to do is we're going to develop a brand new approach. And he said, we're in cahoots with the FAA. We work very closely with the FAA, and they have a high reputation of getting these type of approaches approved. Now, they gave me some good examples to look at. One was, I believe, Cody, Wyoming. Another one was Monterey Airport. And the Monterey Airport, as you know, sits right on the Pacific, and their instrument approach or ILS approach minimums were published, and they suddenly went up. They went up from 200.5 to like almost a VFR approach, and which is a killer for an airport like Monterey. So they hired Lean to go back in and conduct an analysis and revise their approach in order to get those minimums reinstated. The next question I had for Lean is that what their approach is and how they would be able to mitigate these, and what gives them the thought that they might be able to. And their real issue says it comes down to two things. One is the RNAV approaches now with augmentation are not like your typical ILS, which is a straight-in approach. You're 12, 14 miles out from the runway in a case like mountainous terrain. At an airport like sea level, you're probably 6 or 7 for the number one guy. Well, we're not going to be able to do that with the terrain that we have here on a straight-in. So it won't be a straight-in approach. It'll be an RNAV approach with waypoints. But most importantly, what they'll do is they utilize airport lighting to augment the visibility requirements. And so that's one of the notes that when I was reviewing the FAA data on the flight check procedure, was the lack of lighting. So when there's no approach lighting, as you know, there's runway end identifier lights, and there's runway lighting of medium intensity, but there's not enough lighting to be able to improve the minimum. So their thought is that through either a couple of 3 different options of runway lighting, they have the minimum approach lighting system, a rail, which the total acronym is escaping me now, as well as what they call an LDIN. So there are various lighting techniques that could be utilized to augment and improve a nighttime approach. Now, this is not an inexpensive proposition. As you saw, it's a $50,000 bill. However, I did ask them if there's ways that we could, if we got to a certain point and it didn't look like that this was going to be feasible, if we could discontinue the process at that point. And really where they came down to is they have to go through the first 3 tasks to really get an idea if they're going to know where this review will go. Task 4 and 5 are basically you're done with the approach. You've got one, and you're going to implement it. So those last 2 stakes, if we get through 3, we'll know whether or not we have to bother with tasks 4 and 5. But you can't do 1 and then say, oh, should we do 2? And you can't do 2 and assume you're going to do 3. If you don't do the first 3, you're basically not going to end up with a project. In the 6 months I've been here now, the big thing I've heard from pilots as well as the board is we got to eliminate this nighttime restriction. And it is apparent that it's been a hindrance to economic development to the airport to base corporate aircraft here because they don't have a nighttime operation, as well as for people that operate out of here already. I think it's, with the rapidly rising terrain and the difficult terrain, mountain flying at night is very difficult without some sort of guidance. And just even if you're not flying this in instrument conditions, but you're tracking it in VFR conditions, that this will be an extreme benefit to the airport. I really don't expect the board today to make a decision on this because I think it is a big project. And I think it's something we want to socialize with our airport community and get their buy-in and support for a project like this. I think that this particular proposal is a very good one, and I would like to see the community as well as the board get behind it. If they're telling us that this is critical to them, this is the time for us to get the buy-in from them. And I think that would be my recommendation for the way to go on this.
I do have one question. Have you considered any means of outside funding for this project?
I have not. I know that in my first 6 months here, I know that we have cash on hand. So I think that this is something that we could front the money on. There is the potential to go back to the FAA afterwards and get some grant money towards this, especially for the lighting system. There's another component that would have to be involved in that. We need the generator for the backup lighting. So this is something that we would look at as far as rolling it into our ACIP, and with the new engineering firm coming on board, as well as continue the completion of the master plan. I think this is something that we can dovetail into that, and it's not something we have to rush into. But I think this gives us a path forward at this point in time.
Well, my concern is that if we want the buy-in from the community I think that the entire board needs to discuss this before we, of course, do anything. But I'm wondering if this proposal and the generator moving up in the ACIP program could be integrated into the master plan as a first option type thing.
Absolutely, it would have to be, because the FAA would not consider any funding if it wasn't, one, included in the master plan, but also on the ALP. So when I spoke with Kaufman, I've asked them to in their last proposal recommendation for designs, they included some designs, included runway lighting. It wasn't necessarily the type of lighting that we're talking about, but the fact that it's included in there and should be included in our ALP will make that case, will help us make that case. But yes, there may be an opportunity for outside funding. This might be something that our community gets behind and is willing to help support. But I think this is all part of the initiation of this process and being able to get this moving in a direction that the board feels comfortable with.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Mullen? Mr. Barrett?
No, I just wanted to say, I look upon this as an investment, and we'll obviously have to go out and find, the problem is you're making an investment and you don't know the outcome, but that's sort of the nature of taking risks. So we could try and figure out a way to find the money, couldn't we?
Oh, I definitely think so. I mean, I think our budget and our baseline needs are met right now. Most of those funds are earmarked for future AIP grants. So part of this money would meet that, whether it's through the generator acquisition as well as the airport lighting and that sort of thing. But this is part of a bigger picture, and I think this goes towards our further board item, which is our strategic plan. And I think we should really look at rolling this into our thought process on this as part of our strategic approach to developing the airport, modernizing the airport, and economic development of the airport.
Member Rogers?
I agree that this should be very high on our to-do list. I think it's a fantastic idea. I think that when you're going out and canvassing the community, I like Member Barrett always like to look at things as on a return on investment. If we're going to make an investment, what's the potential return? So I think when you're working with the community to get buy-in, there's an opportunity there for you to gather data about what they think might be the benefit to the airport of having be able to do nighttime operations, so that we could quantify it, so that we could identify, so that we could come up with at least a plan or a thought process. What is the return for this investment? And have that be a part of the discussions. I think that'll make the whole process go a lot easier at the board level and with our constituents, with the tenants. And then I also wanted to say that, to me, a buy-in by nodding your head vertically is one level of buy-in, but buy-in by chipping in a couple of bucks is a different level of buy-in, and I would be happier with the second than the first. And so I know that's, I suspect that's part of your thinking, but I just wanted to make sure that's said publicly. And then I love the idea of trying to, if we do end up spending the money, trying to recapture it as part of an overall lighting project, recover some of the money from the FAA.
It's not typical in the industry that the users open their wallet for projects like this. So we're really working outside the box, which is something that we've all indicated that we need to do to move forward as a organization and as an airport. So I'm not opposed to that. I've already, Gary and I have been working on wish lists for equipment and other needs that we think the airport is a must-have as far as updating and modernizing our facilities and maintaining them. I mean, we're going to spend all this money on equipment and infrastructure, but we don't have the equipment and the ability to store that equipment and protect it from the elements and maintain that, then we're really just throwing money away. So as part of our overall strategic vision for this airport and this community, I think this becomes a part of that broader picture.
Any further questions? Member Harris?
Yeah, first of all, just, Ken, I want to say thank you for, being aggressive on this. I'm one of the people that said, hey, can't we do something about this? Can't we turn this into a nighttime airport? So thank you for asking the right questions and getting the right leads and bringing this. Did Lean Engineering give you any, they say that, you've said that they have a pretty good track record here. Have they given you any kind of odds in terms of, if we go through this process, what our chances are of getting this approach? Well,
I don't put a lot of stock in those kind of comments from a vendor. So, I mean, they can give them that, but from reading between the lines as well as direct questioning, they don't think this is out of the realm of reality. They think this is something that they can, through their past experience, that they can do. And that's why I feel real confident about this company in particular. I mean, they do have a great reputation within the industry, but also with the FAA. And the FAA leans on them for, no pun intended, leans on them for expertise in this field. And everybody I've talked to has given these guys sterling remarks and comments about them as an organization and the kind of work that they do. So I think we're engaging the right people, and I think we're asking the right questions. So I feel confident that if the board decides to move forward with this, that we're going to get a good result. And the ROI on this is really going to be about based aircraft. If we get some high-powered companies to base their airplanes here, we're talking about jet airplanes, we're not talking about single-engine aircraft. Those guys buy fuel, those guys pay rent. The tax return on that, those type of assets is a bona fide boon for the organization. So that's really where, as part of our strategic thinking and planning, that we should put our focus. And I think that's where we'll see our return on investment.
Thank you. Any further questions? Mr. Rogers?
Do we have any institutional memory that can be brought to bear on this? I mean, has this issue been broached before, and how did it go?
Nighttime approach has been broached, and that's why I brought up in my discussion regarding the mountain peaks that are penetrating the approach surfaces out to the east and the lighting of them. And when they determined that the lighting was not going to be the obstruction lighting of those peaks was not going to change the outcome of the restriction of nighttime approach, they basically abandoned it. And it's been sitting fallow since at least 2007, I think. That's kind of where my recollection is on that. So it's, from my observation over here the past 6 months, is like, there's nothing we can do. That's kind of the mantra that I've heard since I've been here. Oh, you can't do anything about it. And my experience in the air traffic control, it was like, there's got to be a way to mitigate this. And so that's kind of where my thought's always been, that there is a way to do it. We just haven't found it yet. And I believe that these guys have the secret sauce, which is the improved lighting, the what they call wide area augmentation of the GPS signal, the RNAV signals from the satellite. There's a couple of different really high-tech approaches that they're taking to this, as opposed to land-based navigational equipment like an ILS. We're not going to get that. That approach will not return anything to us. We'll never make the minimums on it. The equipment costs are exorbitant. This is the best way and the best solution for us, is an approach like this.
Mr. Takis?
I would just add, what Ken said is true. We do have history with attempts to get it, but in the past, I think the only things the airport authority did was continue to persist with the FAA, probably to the point of being obnoxious. But we kept asking them, can't we get it? Can't we get it? Can't you lift this? And this is a much more intelligent approach, coming up with a solution that we can sell to them instead of just badgering them, hoping they'll change their mind. And so we've got a little bit of history with the issue, but we haven't tried this approach, and I think this is a great idea. In addition to the investment, by the way, it also adds tremendously to the safety of the operations of the airport, because right now the airport is used at night, and it is used by some of our larger aircraft at night, but without the benefit of an instrument approach. And so, you get into those conditions where it's kind of marginal. This would be enormously helpful from a safety standpoint. So I totally support it. And I did draft a proposed motion, but I didn't know where this was going, so you might want to ignore what I drafted and go with whatever Ken recommends.
My suggestion would be that we table this item as well until October, when we have Mr. Golden and Mr. Harvey here, and we have the opportunity to approach some of our tenants who coordinate with those people, who have some of the bigger aircraft on the airport and so forth, and then really get to the point where we go to Kaufman and suggest perhaps what their final approach will be on the master plan with a little bit more informed input. Comments?
Go ahead.
Mr. Rogers.
I'm thinking that maybe in that time frame before the next meeting, too, we could get a second bid, so that if we wanted to proceed, we could.
I had revised my briefing memo on that. When I originally looked at it, I thought this fit within the statute on any vendor bids between $25,000 and $50,000. This is actually exempt as a professional service. And from what I've since learned since I drafted that and issued the new updated briefing memo, is that this appears to be a single source. This appears to be the only company that does this. And as a result, there probably isn't anybody to get a bid from. I'm sure there's somebody who would give you a bid for anything, but these are really the only ones that I think that the FAA has credibility with and really has a track record for doing it.
I have no problem using them in a single source environment as long as we're not violating any FAA requirements.
Thank you. Mr. Barrett.
My only comment is to commend you, as Bradley did, as I think we all feel up here. I'm reminded of Henry Ford and his effort to get an 8-cylinder engine that didn't go out to the next county. And he finally kept telling his engineers, it can be done. I don't know how, but you can do it. And finally they came up with a V8. So I'll commend you as trying to find a way to make a V8 instead of a straight 8.
Any further comments? Then we will bring this back to the October agenda and perhaps expand on it a little bit, depending on what input we get between now and then. That being said, we will move on to item G4 for discussion and possible action to approve sublease of Hangar 6 in the Comstock hangars. Mr. Moen.
Thank you, Chair Law. You may not know that hangar used to house an Aztec that Mr. and Mrs. Law would use for dry storage, and they recently disposed themselves of that the airplane, and thus the hangar is apparently available at this point in time. I did go look at the hangar with David, and Gary and I were over there yesterday, and we measured the door. And the door will not work for the plow or the tractor. So the only things we could really bring out of the elements would be the lighted X's and the blower and some of the other implements, which is not anything to be sneezed at. That's really where I have a big issue with the airport buying equipment and not being able to properly store it and maintain it. I'm going to really sing Gary's praises here for a moment. Gary does a lot with very little. He was out in 100-degree heat working on the tractor. The guy's skill set for maintenance, whether it's vehicle, building, airfield, is tremendous. The guy thinks out of the box. He has got a lot of different arrows in his quiver, and we need to, as part of our strategic thinking, to provide him and whoever succeeds Gary in the future with a proper place to store equipment and to maintain it. And this was an attempt at circumventing the process of building a building at this point in time. I think we may get some short-term benefit, even if we just do it for the winter, that we get some of that gear out of the weather. That might be a feasible approach. But my long-term view is that sooner than later we need to get a proper structure where we can store and maintain equipment. No sense in buying a new plow or a new tractor if that needs to happen and just leave it outside. So I just think when we get into the strategic planning and process that we should discuss this. Also, as part of my due diligence on this, I reached out to the ADO's office with an email and asked them if this would meet their hangar use policy. As you know, we had a big to-do about hangar use on the airport, and I don't want to come out and where it's okay for us but not for them type scenario. So I'm kind of waiting for a response back on that. I don't think from my own personal viewpoint, I get calls every day about hangar availability. So I'm almost in the point I'd rather have another airplane in that hangar than a couple pieces of equipment. But that doesn't mean we can't take some sort of action this year to help protect that equipment a little bit better, whether we're tarping it or we're getting some other temporary type structure together or looking for an off-airport site or something to get the stuff that we're not using on a routine basis in and out of the element. So this may not be the best solution and may not be something that we need to vote on today either. I think we probably should wait back to hear from the ADO, because even if it is, let's say the ADO determines this is non-aeronautical use, even though the equipment's used to maintain the airfield, there's no sense in going ahead and having a vote on record and then turn around and have to go back and correct that. So
I agree with that. And the only reason I asked you to put this on here was, and I have contacted Ingrid Thomas, and she has not called me back. So I don't know if she is even up for extending the lease and doing so on and so forth. But I wanted at least to give us the chance to talk about it and bring that issue up and start moving toward a solution that will protect our assets. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, I don't expect any action on this item at this meeting, but I did want to start the conversation. Is there any public comment on this item before we move forward? None seen. We will move forward to the next item. Thank you, Mr. Moen. Item G5 for discussion and possible action to approve formation of a strategic planning committee. Mr. Moen.
Well, once again, this is something that has been on my to-do list, and my one-year action plan is to get together and with the board and establish a strategic planning committee. I've talked extensively with Member Rogers about this and the importance of this, as well as with Member Harris. I think that we probably today, maybe the makeup of this committee and what this might look like, and as well as the approach of going about it. Now, this is something we could probably do in-house with a little bit of guidance, I would say, but there is a lot of value to having a facilitator involved in this and being able to keep the discussions on track and to not wander off on rabbit trails. But I think this is critical in our whole discussion about the airport and the development of the airport and where we are looking to go over the next few years. And the master plan has kind of served the airport as its strategic plan, for the lack of a better discussion, but it hasn't really narrowed down the approaches to that to meet those goals. It's usually something that's been done through our ACIP program. What do we do next? What are we taking care of next on the airfield? So I think as far as vision, the big thing I heard during our hiring process is, we need economic development. This airport needs to increase its base of aircraft. It needs to increase the businesses that operate on the airfield. I feel very fortunate we've had the opportunity to add a flight school so quickly with the closure or ceasing of operations of Carson Aviation Ventures. So that's a real positive. That tells me that there's people out here that are interested in this airport. And I think that this strategic planning process will help us do that. One of the big things I've discussed along the way is, one, our enabling legislation. And I know that, as we all know, that's going before a rewrite here very shortly. One of the concerns I've had in that bill has been the makeup of the board and the historical picture that the board, and no offense to anybody sitting here today, that the board has not always looked out for the best interests of the airport. There's been at times where, due to the makeup of the board, they've looked out for their own personal interests. And so I have some concern with in the strategic planning process that we focus on how to mitigate some of that. We have to, if we come up with an overall vision by the members on the board today, that could be drastically changed 2 years from now when the board makeup changes. But one thing, if we get a strategic plan in place prior to any real big changes on the board, that will help keep that future board focused on direction. I mean, it doesn't mean that future board couldn't vote and say we're going to scrap this and start all over, but that's really out of our hands at this point in time. What we can control is what we put in place today, and I believe that is a blueprint for the airport for the next 5 years. And I think the committee should look like part of the board, certainly. We should look towards the airport community. It doesn't have to be a fixed-based operator, certainly, to represent the airport. And I think we should look to the city and NDOT as well. And here's why I say that. Even though we rewrite the 844, the ownership of the airport is still vested in the city of Carson. And all my discussions with the Board of Supervisors, with the mayor, with the city manager, there is no real buy-in on the airport in their thinking. It really a land use plan. That's basically their thought process. And I'm not saying that right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm just stating that as a fact. The other piece is that NDOT is a big operator on that airfield. And in all my research, I have not been able to determine how they remunerate the airport for their operations. The land they're on is excluded. The jet fuel they buy is fuel flowage tax is excluded. They pay nothing towards the maintenance of the airfield, but they're a big user. So they have a vested interest. We want to figure out how we bring them into the fold. And one of the ways that we can do that is, one, through the strategic planning process, but also to identify that, hey, look, as a user, this needs to be a line item in your budget. And the way they do that at the Reno Tahoe Airport is both the Air National Guard and at Reno, as well as the Army Guard at Stead, pay a maintenance fee back to the airport based upon their usage. And that is a very fair prospect for going forward. But this is some of the things that would come up in the strategic plan. But if we don't include NDOT in this discussion, then I don't think we're going to get buy-in from them. So I think we have to look at the makeup of being Airport Authority, city, NDOT, and a community of somebody from the airport.
Questions? Mr. Rogers.
I couldn't agree more with everything that you said. I think that if we're going to do a strategic planning process, it ought to be facilitated by somebody, hopefully, who is skilled, but maybe a retired skilled person, who is willing to help us out for a fee, hopefully zero, that we can afford. But I also, and I think that it ought not to be board centric. I think that the creation of a strategic plan is a tremendous opportunity for us to encourage members of the community to get more involved in what happens at the airport, and I think that would be fantastic for the airport. So what I would be looking for from the board is recommendations, and referrals, people in the community that could really help the airport prosper, who might be interested in participating on a strategic plan. So to the list of agencies that I think ought to be involved, I'd like to add somebody from Carson City Convention and Visitors Bureau. I think that'd be a good addition to the mix of somebody to go see if we could solicit somebody off of that group that might want to participate.
I think that's a great idea.
Just a correction, I think they're now called something else, but yeah, I know who you mean.
Okay.
Tourism, whatever
that's right,
it
they
is.
did change their name.
CTA.
Yeah.
And the other thing we might include as well is state tourism, because there has been some discussion of changing Kurt's position from NDOT over to tourism because of the aviation part of it being so much more critical to the tourism arm. So that's a thought, and we can talk to Kurt about that. I'd be more than happy to do that.
But one of the components for that, if we do add a facilitator, we may want to create a budget item number for that. I don't know how to go about that at this point, other than probably surveying a couple of candidates that may be are capable of doing that. One I know fairly well, a gal by the name of Erica Olson. The company used to be called MP3 Planning, and they've done the strategic plan for the Reno Tahoe Airport, but they also did it for when I worked for Northern Nevada Business Weekly. They did our strategic plan as well. She also is the author of a book called Strategic Planning for Dummies, which I've picked up a copy of and have read it, and that gives me confidence that it's something we could do ourselves. But I really got to say that if it's self-directed, that the tendency to really stay focused and completing the task is much harder than if you have a facilitator that can kind of keep that process going. So I think that we should consider that as an item. And I can do some research on that and bring some information back to the next board meeting on that.
I would also suggest that you put out an email to our other board members explaining what we've talked about in these items and ask for their suggestions as well, so that it will be a broader group consensus when we come back for the October meeting.
We'll do it.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on this item? Then it will appear again on our October agenda. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, my hope is that by the time we get to the October meeting, that we have a couple of possible facilitators identified between all of our efforts, and that we each bring with us one or two suggestions of community members that we think would be good additions to that team.
And I would ask Mr. Moen to include that concept in his email to our other members, so that when we do come back, it'll be a full picture for them, and they'll have suggestions. All right. Moving forward, any public comment on this item? None seen. We will move on. The airport engineer's report. I talked to Brian. He was unable to make this, but he did provide us with copies of the minutes from the meeting on the extension. And Mr. Moen, would you cover that?
I'll be happy to. We held a pre-construction meeting yesterday for the taxway rehabilitation project. It's going to get underway beginning October 8th, so that's a Monday. The project is scheduled it has a 32-day schedule, but their goal is to do it in about 2 weeks. A lot of the work is going to be done at night, 7 p.m. to 4 a.m., and there is going to be a couple of days. October is scheduled right now, October 15th and 16th, to do 2 full days of closure at the airport. And that's when they're putting down the tax seal and all that sort of stuff. It does not lend itself for pull on, pull off, and being able to accommodate operations. So this is going to put a damper on some of our tenants' activities, and it may require them to make other arrangements. For example, NDOT may have to relocate their airplane for a couple of days in order to continue their flight schedule, and it will impact some people. As a result of that, I scheduled a tenant meeting for next Monday, October 1st, at 5:30 in the terminal building to discuss this. I'll also put together a tenant bulletin outlining the project, the phasing, and the work schedule that will get out to all the tenants. So that gives us a good solid week to reach out and for them to make other plans. The nighttime work will allow the early morning operators to get out and be done with their operation prior to a closure. If that's the case, we might be able to negotiate that with our contractor, because the temperatures are going to be a big issue. Overnight temperatures, if they get down in the 40s or low 50s, they may have to wait till 8:30 or 9 in the morning before they close it, which would allow our NDOT and our other early morning folks to get in and out. So those are the kind of things that we're going to have to discuss with them and the contractor. I hope to have both the contractor representative as well as our Brian Fitzgerald at that meeting on Monday the 1st. But we're going to do an extensive outreach to make sure that our tenants hear about it and are aware of it and are supportive of the plan. Nobody can object to us trying to improve and maintain our facilities, but we do know it'll be a hindrance to some of those tenants, and we want to minimize that impact as much as possible. So that's the essential issues here in Brian's minutes. He does lay out the plan, the timing, and a lot of that stuff in here as well, some other technical parts of the contract with the contractor and the subcontractors. But most of it is pretty clear and open. If you have any questions, I'm happy to address them individually.
Any questions of Mr. Moen on the engineering part? Moving forward, would you like to continue with your manager's report?
Sure, I would. As I've alluded to a couple of times today, this marks the 6-month anniversary this month on the 22nd. How time flies! Hard to believe that kind of time has taken place. I'm going to go down just a list of some information for you right now that you may or may not have been aware of. Our August fuel flow for 100 low lead was 1,670 gallons. As compared to 900 gallons in July, so that's a nice little boost. Our fuel flow for Jet A in August was 19,160 gallons versus 15,465 in July. So we did have a little bump on both of those. We had 74 tie-down nights over the period of the air races, which I think is a nice number. It was about $740 U.S. There was one incident during the air race period where an RV-9 landed on runway 9, even though there was a strong headwind for runway 27 out of the west. He felt that he needed the extra excitement of landing with a tailwind and got ground looped. It did have a minimal impact on the airport overall. The FAA was all out at the Stead Airport and very focused on that. They indicated that they were going to send somebody down, then they just changed their mind at the end and said, hey, take some pictures, remove the airplane, and maybe we'll send the sheriff, or ask the sheriff to come over and take a police report. So it didn't appear to have a big impact on the operations. As you know, I was gone during that time frame. Runway 9 PAPI is out of service currently. We've replaced a couple pieces of equipment in there. One's called the tilt switch, which impacts the presentation of the lights out to the west. And they also, Gary discovered that there is a power issue now, and it'll cycle on for 20 seconds or so, and then it'll shut off. One thing about a piece of equipment like the PAPI, it's not made to go on and off. It's designed to be on. Well, being that it's got such a high approach angle from to runway 9 from the west, it is not usable at night. So there had to be a mechanism to turn it on and off at night. So it's causing some wear and tear on the various components based on that. And they're all electronic. So, but Gary's still trying to work on that and see if he can come up with a solution. I already talked about the pre-con meeting we had. The snowplow is currently over at NDOT, and they're doing service on that in preparation for winter. Our tractor's been down for about 3 weeks, and we've had a couple big components that need to be replaced. One had to do with hydraulics, the other had to do with a clutch piece that connects to the mower. We shipped it out to a repair place out in Mountain House called Pit Lane. They brought it back and was still doing it. So Gary brought the owner of Pit Lane back out on site, had him look at it. They agreed to fix it without any further charge, unless there were any parts that were involved. And right now we're trying to get it back. There's some mowing we need to get done before that he's had to put off as a result of that before winter hits. So we're anxiously awaiting that. That tractor wasn't brand new when we acquired it, so we're going to put about $3,000 into it so far this part of the year. It's unfortunate that we've had to do that, but that's something we got to look at. So we're getting it prepared for the snow removal season. I've reached out to my contacts at the Reno Tower Airport about including Gary in some snow training that they do, refresher training they do every year with their airfield team. And I think that'll be real valuable for him to pick up on perhaps some different techniques and, refresher on some of that. It's a way different operation that they have than we do. But I think it's all good for continuing education. Sierra Skyway, the hangar project up on the north part of the airport, is pouring slabs this week. They have the stem walls all in and moving forward on that, so those should be in and done. I asked Dennis Giangreco just the other day about where he thinks the timeline is on completion, and they believe it'll be sometime December, January, as far as everything being said and done before he gets a certificate of occupancy. Tonight, there is an airport planning meeting in this room that is going to discuss the subdivision map for that project. I'll be attending that meeting. We are underway with the Arrowhead approach. That's, if you'll recall, that's the entryway off Arrowhead Drive onto our property. A couple things occurred, and also while I was away, is that they determined that the RCP pipe that we've been sitting on for the last 10 years or so is not usable. And the contractor said, I'm not putting that in, and I'm not going to be responsible for it. So that required them to go out and purchase about $10,000 worth of pipe. As you know, it's a 50-50 project with us and Centralite. So I did meet with Gary Lehman yesterday, and we did discuss this as well. And part of that discussion, he also mentioned to me that him and the contractor were looking at the slope from Arrowhead Drive onto our property is about 8 degrees as it sits currently, which is trying to get a 120,000-pound rig up that with any type of running start onto Arrowhead Drive is not going to function. So they're going to mitigate that slope with on-site material. They are not asphalting that piece. Might be something that we consider at a future date and time, but they're going to use the material on site to change that to about 2 to 3 degree slope at the most. They'll compact the heck out of it, and then it should serve our purposes going forward. But Rolling Rock Construction and Centralite have been very on top of it. And we'll get this all settled at the end. I'll let the board know. I'll probably have to come back to the board for the authorization of the funds, even though we did authorize the project not to exceed a certain amount. We'll just make sure that everybody knows what those numbers are when we get to the end of this. I'm not sure if you have noticed, but on August 30th, we did have a vehicle leave Gonai Road and take out about 120 feet of our fence. So we still have temporary fencing up there. It's basically some construction fencing. We've been having a hard time of getting a fencing contractor on site for this to take a repair. They're all busy, as everybody in town seems to be telling us. Get with you when I can. So we're in their ear about it and trying to get that resolved. It doesn't appear to have been a security issue at this point in time. I mean, granted, somebody could walk to that ditch by the Station 52 right now and wander onto our airport pretty easily. So this construction fence or any part of the fencing that doesn't have barbed wire on there is not much of a deterrent to somebody who wants to get on the airfield. Apparently there was a woman wandering on the airport last week that Gary chased off, so she found her way on there in some fashion. But she just was out for a walk. You may have also noticed on the north end of the airport is one of our derelict Grummins on the northwest pad, and they have commenced dismantling of that aircraft. They've removed the props and the engine so far, and their next step is to start cutting it up. So we anticipate that to get completed, and the number 2 Grumman's not far behind it. It may be sold, from what I understand from Dennis Buin, but we've got some movement on that. So I think that's a nice addition to our property line out there once we get that off there. One final item I'd like to touch on real quick. I've been informed by Supervisor Bonkowski that there is a offer to purchase 3 acres of land off of Lamont Drive, which is out to the east of Taxiway Bravo. The buyer is a gentleman by the name of Wayne Chilton, and he's looking to put on a hangar, and he's going to want through the fence access, but he's also stipulated he'd like to put in a fuel tank. And so I'm going to try to meet with Supervisor Bonkowski and the buyer, as well as city planning next Tuesday, and discuss this in further detail. I want to make sure, one, that if this parcel does not include deeded airport access, I'm not real excited about giving an additional through the fence. I think we have land on our airport where someone could build. And if that's the case, I would prefer to see that versus them operate off through the fence. But if this is a parcel that has through the fence access, this does give us the opportunity to dedicate a deeded location for access, which is something we want to do anyway, and has been identified in our master plan. So I'll know more about that at a later date and be able to fill you in on that. We're supposed to meet with Cinderlight. Was going to be Thursday. That's being postponed to renew their operation of the pit. As you know, they've been the only operator. They're the only one who really bid any serious dollars on our revenue, and you know that's a good return on our investment. We're looking at probably a 3-year extension, and we're also going to discuss an adjustment in their royalty to us based upon primarily on CPI. I think we're getting after I've done some research on that, I had a couple people come out, look at the pit, and that are very in tune with that. A gentleman from Joy Engineering gave me some good feedback on that, and he thinks we got a really good deal with Cinderlight. He says he runs a pit out at Trick, and he doesn't pay a royalty to Trick at all. They basically, look at it as a service for them as opposed to a revenue stream. So I think if we get a CPI adjustment with Cinderlight, we'll be able to get some additional revenue out of the pit going forward, and I think that'll be a win-win.
Also, if we do negotiate the increase with the CPI, that'll help us defray the cost of our pipe that we had to purchase. So that would be helpful. Any questions of Mr. Moen on his report? Mr. Rogers, go ahead.
I'm into the questions today, I guess.
Okay.
Could we have a discussion with Cinderlight about timing on getting the cliff, the cliff turned into a ramp?
And I believe he asked this at the last meeting, and they currently are doing that as we speak. In the areas that they have already removed rock, they're putting in the big boulders, they're putting in soil, and they are mitigating that. I get a photo that I'll send you of an area that they've been doing a lot of work on, so to give you some better idea of what that looks like. But yes, it's part of their operation. They're not wanting to wait until they're all done there and do it. They want to do it as they move and complete the process. So they're very engaged in that.
Thank you. Mr. Takis, your report?
I have nothing to add.
Thank you. And since Mr. Harvey is not here today, we will move past the treasurer's report. And I understand, Mr. Moen, that you've been working with Beth on doing the final pickup work on the audit.
Yeah, we're completing the audit at this point in time. I had a couple of items that she requested me just recently, and have turned those back around with her. So I don't think she's going to be off schedule at all on this. One of the issues that I would have provided financials today, but when I produced them the other day to review, there were some items that looked like they'd been miscategorized, and so they weren't accurate, and I didn't want to present those at this point. Really, there's two things that's going on. One, Bullets & Co. is kind of learning how and where we put everything, but then Beth has been in there and moved stuff around too, and so I need to get those two on the same page so that things can line up, because right now they don't.
Okay, I would suggest to you that once those reconciliations are made, that you go ahead and send out copies
Absolutely.
to the board members and perhaps post them.
I'm hoping that it won't take a lot of time, but it may not be before the next meeting, because as Beth is right in the audit season, I may not be able to pull her away enough to get. She's responded to some email questions with them, but I don't think it's been enough to close the loop on it. But I'm hopeful that I'll be able to get some time with her and with Bolus to complete that.
Okay, one of the things I would like to mention to the members who are here too is that Beth had noticed us that there had been some changes at the federal level in some of the accounting principles that required future value on employee benefit packages and so forth. And we've received a letter from PEBP, the Public Employees Benefits, on Gary's health insurance coverage, that there's no substantial effect, no significant effect on our financial liability into the future. So that was a really big thing for her. And she had suggested we go to an actuary to get that letter. I suggested we go to PEBP, and they provided it to us for free, so I'm really pleased about that.
Thank you. Actuaries are expensive.
Yes, they are. All right. If we don't have any other comments on the treasurer's report, knowing that it will be coming to us in good time, I would move on to item L, report from authority members. Do we have any status review of projects, communication correspondence, or other activity that the members would like to report at this time? Seeing none, we are to the point in the meeting where I would ask for public comment if there is any. Seeing none, we would move past that item. Any items to be included, other than those we've mentioned today, on the October agenda should be given to the manager for inclusion on that agenda. And I would encourage members that are here today to review that agenda to make sure that your comments are included on the items and so forth. That being said, if I have no other comments or discussion items, none heard, we are adjourned.